Welcome to Medicine Redefined, a podcast focusing on helping you reclaim ownership of your health. I'm Dr. Darsha.
And I'm Dr. Altamash Raja. We're your hosts, here to challenge conventional practices and uncover the stories behind pioneers shaping the future of medicine. Our conversations not only focus on the individual level to dissect common practices for health optimization, but also zoom out to enhance systemic change.
Join us as we look to break the status quo, move the needle forward, and put the health back in healthcare.
What's up?
Back on the mainland.
Back here, man. What's up?
HVAC is not working again. It's like 94 degrees outside. So if I melt on camera, I want you to keep going.
You got it, man. I got it. Either way, ride or die. Medicine Redefined.
Yeah, you carry the load. Pause. Topic of today's discussion, man. Is medicine worth it still? And just a little background. I think this is a question, actually, shout out to Haritha who brought this up. Something that's top in mind for a lot of people who are going into the medical field. Honestly, this was a question that's been asked of me prior to the One Big Beautiful Bill, asked by a couple of undergrad students who were shadowing and just come across my path. And of course, I'm like, oh, this is a long discussion. So here we are. And then if I do end up seeing them again, I'll just tell them to listen to whatever this will be, episode 179 or 180. I'm not really sure. Numbers are always off. But when you hear that, what are the first thoughts that come to your mind?
Yeah, and I just want to clarify for the listeners, I have Haritha's text pulled up, right? So the reason she's bringing this up is she's seeing this online a lot lately, right? With TikTok, Instagram, and obviously because of the Big Beautiful Bill, a lot of people are putting their opinions out on there. But so she's asking us, hey, there's an argument that it's not worth it to be a doctor in this era economy with time invested, financial outcome, lifestyle balance, etc. So she wants us to touch on that, as well as people don't think that you can do anything else and be a physician, but us two are doing it. So she wants our unique perspective on that. So yeah, I guess we can start with, what do we hear when people say, is it worth it? I mean, that's the age-old question. I guess it's not age-old. It's more of the new era question. I don't think we were hearing that question in the 80s or 90s, as we always reference to the golden era of medicine. But obviously, as we've touched on other episodes with insurances, muddying the waters, private equity, education has changed, or lack thereof has not really kept up with the times. And there's been built up tension, built up frustration, yada, yada, things that people know, as we've talked about on this. I think what's interesting for me is when I chose the path of medicine, and we'll get into this too, about how the way we thought about medicine long-term versus just really being in the present moment. I think we both probably had a long-term perspective on it when we were probably pre-med and even in medical school. When I was a resident is when I start to really get jaded and think that medicine was probably not worth it. I think I was also at a point where everything I was doing was getting dictated, right? The time I woke up, the time I was sleeping, it was all dictated around this training that you have to go through, quote unquote, grueling. I mean, we were in rehab, so maybe we had a little bit easier than other residents and other specialties. It was definitely a jaded perspective because we're very much into lifestyle medicine, integrated functional, really root cause, trying to take care of the patient and be more preventative. And it's really difficult to do, especially as a resident and especially in our current healthcare system. But then when I started looking at, okay, now I got to find a job and I got to understand where I'm going to live and I have to understand the type of practice I want. And then do I have to build that out? A lot of it to me just became, oh my God, is this worth it at all? And I was under the camp that it wasn't. And I would actually tell students to really take a hard look in the mirror before they wanted to go down medicine and to really see the reasons that they wanted to do it. Now that I'm coming up on a year of being an attending, I have definitely flipped the switch. It's also a unique perspective because I've made it work. Like, I really enjoy what I do. I have a good lifestyle balance. I'm in a great location. Money's good. Time is good. Everything. Like, people say you can only have two of the three, but I've really hit all three. And so if you know how to do that, then yes, medicine can be worth it because it allows you to have options to practice the way you want to.
It's interesting to me that you offer that perspective. I think, outside looking in for the last couple of years, I would have said that you were already doing so much of that, making it worth it. So I think the question that I would throw back to our awesome interns and just anybody who asks that question is not necessarily is it worth it, but how do we make it worth it? And I think the theme of the podcast, if anybody hasn't looked at what we're all about and what the logo stands for and what the name suggests, is it's all how we are trying to make it worth it, how other people have come on here most recent guest, Dr. Vince Marchese, a ton before that, talking about how they are taking agency back into their hands. That question in the 80s probably wasn't asked because financially, it was a very clear answer, was yes. And I think that now when people are probably asking this question, at least especially on the social platforms after the One Big Beautiful Bill, and I'll get into a little bit of that, how the finances really don't make sense. I will very clearly tell people financially, it's a horrible decision. I think when you just look at the return on investment, opportunity cost, time, all that kind of stuff, I think it's a really bad decision. There are better ways to make money.
Correct.
Because things that we've highlighted before, right? It goes beyond burnout. It's like moral injury in modern medicine, right? So it's not just exhaustion. People go into medicine because they were promised something, and that's not what we're getting. So it's more betrayal, right? You realize as you start practicing that RVUs matter more than outcomes. Documentation matters more than connection. Metrics matter more than humans, right? And at that point, the things that you're highlighting in residency, sure, it's grueling physically, your sleepless nights, et cetera, et cetera. I think a lot of people appreciate that. Yeah, physically it's very taxing, but I think emotionally is what physicians complain about the most because of all the things that I mentioned, the moral injury. And I know for me, getting through the residency period, again, PM&R, I know if there's somebody general surgery listening out there, yes, I understand we're PM&R, so I don't put that in perspective for people. However, it can be challenging, but I think that's part that we can get through. I think it's the emotional part, it's the betrayal part that really makes it difficult. And the challenge is that moral injury has a price tag, right? And that's where people sometimes often use the words burnout and escaping the system, et cetera, like much like other people have come out and talked about, healthcare insurance being a scam, which, in some sense it is. And the irony is that this new bill that comes out, it's literally called the Big Beautiful Bill, but really it's, once it completely gets implemented, you're going to have nearly 12 million people losing Medicaid coverage, right? You're going to have 3.4 trillion added to the deficit for tax cuts. Corporations are going to be getting permanent tax breaks. What becomes especially challenging for students looking to enroll into medical school effective 2026. Let me just throw some numbers at you, right? So I was just thinking about, well, how is it going to actually impact? Are you familiar with the actual specifics of the bill?
Here and there about, PSLF is still intact, but then there's a maximum about 100K, I think, and then people are going to have to take private, essentially.
Yeah. So the upper end limit, which makes it really interesting, right? So the Grad Plus loans that were previously available are completely eliminated, effective July 2026. There are new federal loan caps. So $50,000 a year in federal loans and $200,000 total over time. Do you know what the average public school effective 2025 AMC data, annual tuition and board and everything included?
I'm guessing around
in-state tuition.
I want to say 40.
Yeah.
Or something around there.
73,000.
That's insane.
Yeah.
I love that much.
A private comes out to be about 103,000. This is, again, looking at AMC data across the whole country. So not just specifics. Obviously, your state could be less, and if you're in the South, it'd probably be a little bit less. So the median debt at graduation is around 205,000. And this bill caps you at 50 a year. So where's that gap going to come from, right? You have this gap of, if you're going to go private, nearly $400,000. Full disclosure, I'm somewhere in that ballpark. You have to fill that gap. You have to go to private lenders and qualify for that kind of stuff. That makes it very, very for people to bank on decisions, especially people who don't come from an area where they can get access to these types of loans. So I think that that's another point to consider. And I think that's a question that people are going to really have to tackle when you're 18, 19 years old, because that's when you're going to college and that's when you're deciding you're going to go pre-med and you're going to run down this track into a 7-year advanced program or whatever it might be. And people, once you put your head down, you're going pre-med, you're just going hurdle after hurdle after hurdle.
Yep.
But this is a very important discussion you're going to need to have with hopefully somebody who is wiser than you to tell you, actually, you should really consider this. Like, what are the reasons that you're doing this for? If the reasons are non-financial, by all means. We'll get into some strategies and tactics and things that we've learned, things that you highlighted at the outset about how to make it worth it. I think that's probably what I'm more interested in, but I did want to highlight that because I think that is something very important for people to consider. You just can't, because finances are really important in terms of this country, and student loans don't get discharged when you get a disability or you die.
Oh,
That's the only one.
100%, man.
Or go bankrupt.
And then you look at the sequelae of that, right? I mean, you're going to have less people going into primary care right off the bat. I mean, we're already seeing that trend. People are going towards more or subspecialties, what fields that pay more. That's obviously going to be the trend now. If you're going to have higher interest rate, you're going to have more loans to pay back. That's just what we're going to see. So it'll definitely be an interesting trend. The whole healthcare world is going to be shaken up, especially with AI and what's going to get taken over and more private equity coming in. So yeah, it'll definitely be interesting. So it's a good point to raise up.
I think one of the first things that's important to address is when people ask about, is medicine worth it? I guess another way to ask is being a doctor worth it? I think an important thing that you talked about is like breaking this myth that the doctors are people who only doctor, right? I told Vince I was going to mention this. When we were, prior to our conversation with Vince, I remember I was on LinkedIn somewhere, and there's this Harvard trained physician, I don't remember her name, that I follow her, and she's now a consultant. So she's not practicing medicine, but she posts a lot about, how to create your career, how to build businesses, etc. I remember an old EM doc commented on one of her social media posts, her LinkedIn posts, something to the tune of yet another person who took the seat of another med school seat that could have gone to somebody, and I just thought, and I was like, man, that is such an interesting thing to say. And I think this toxic gatekeeping of medical, this zero-sum game, as you about, is like, oh, that seat could have gone to somebody else who would have gone on to cure. I just found that to be really interesting. She had a very awesome diplomatic response. But I was just thinking, like, what an interesting thing to go on and comment on somebody. And the unfortunate reality is that there are a ton of people who have that mindset. And I don't want to just say, oh, it's the old guard that have that. It's actually, there are a lot of people in our generation, millennials, 5-10 years out from residency, who have a very similar mentality. And I think that's one of the things that makes it very difficult for anybody who is trying to break the mold, so to speak, who is trying to do things that that make it look like medicine is a jumping off platform rather than a prison, and if you let those people dictate, to use your word, it's going to be very hard for it to be worth it, quote unquote, on certain days.
It's funny you mentioned the jump off. I'm lucky to have mentors who said, go and get your medical degree, because once you get it, it is a platform for you to jump off to so many different things. And it's been absolutely true, especially in the game of social media now, when it comes to branding, when it comes to any type of career choice. If you want to be a mentor, if you want to be a speaker, if you want to be a consultant, if you want to open up your own practice. And we talk about how in our generation, people look down at people who do cash-based practices. So I mean, that's still within the realm of medicine. I mean, look at Peter Attia, who got out of surgery, did consulting, and then came back to practicing medicine. I wonder what the EM doc thinks about that, right? Somebody who goes out, gets experience, comes back, still making a difference in the world with his podcast, but is doing it cash-based in a concierge way. I really wonder what that EM doc would say in regards to those types of people.
Yeah, I'm not in the habit of this type of stuff, but I really considered strongly commenting on that or resharing it and in such a way, and just really getting to talk about it. But I doubt that type of conversation goes anywhere. There's going to be no dialogue there, right? And that person's going to come back and forth. We're behind. So I choose not to engage, but I really generally would be interested. I also think, though, that there are physicians who will feel guilty doing anything else. They'll feel guilty posting on social media. They'll feel guilty marketing themselves. This is something that I struggle with deeply. So I always try to pick Vince's brain, right? How do we do that? So I remember Sassy and me offline talking a while back about how important it is to go put yourself out there. Because I think it almost feels salesy, and you're not supposed to be that. You're supposed to be anything but. I recently had a trainee who we were working with, and we were talking about, what the options might be for the patient. And I remember him saying, we could convince the patient to have an injection. I said, no, we don't convince the patient to do anything. We present with options, we guide, we do that kind of stuff. But it's even interesting because I knew what he meant and I was gently guiding, but the verbiage is really important because you say that, it sounds like, oh, you're selling something. But the reality is we're all doing that.
Right.
You're the whole thing, the first impressions, everything, like we're all trying to sell ourselves in one way or another. But physicians particularly feel incredibly guilty marketing themselves. Why do you think that is?
I it's tough, right? I think when we look at first principles of why we want to go into medical school, we're always told it has to come from a clean conscience, which is wanting to help the patient. So we go through, we study our asses off, we're learning all these things, we go through all these grueling exams, we go through residency, and then we're finally at patient encounters that matter, right, as an attending. And I think we take this oath. I don't think anyone remembers the oath, but there's this aura of this oath that, oh, I can't do that because what if I get caught? I think that's really what it is. It's what if I get caught as a fraud, as a doctor who's trying to convince or sell or trying to influence behavior, because it doesn't feel natural. It's interesting because even today at my hospital, we had a discussion about patient rights, and Florida is a state where patient rights it's part of the culture. It's very big. For example, if a patient comes in and they want to sign a waiver because they're a fall risk and they want to walk, they can do that because patient rights say whatever the patient wants to do. Whereas where I trained, in Pennsylvania, we would convince the patient to stay in bed because we don't want them to fall for an injury. And then we'd have a discussion the next day when therapy evaluated them. So we get into this like muddy water of like, if you're convincing for a better benefit versus it's up to the patient and they can do what they want. I think that's kind of where that dilemma comes from, is that, like, for instance, you talk about metrics, is yes, I have to influence behavior in the inpatient setting in order to satisfy certain metrics. I have to do it in a way where I know that it's best for the patient as well. And I don't know if that skews judgment at all, but there's definitely thoughts about convincing myself saying, hey, if I get this patient out a day or two earlier, yes, it helps metrics, but maybe they also won't catch pneumonia or a UTI or any other hospital-related infection. So there's this constant game of back and forth in my head, at least, as if I'm talking about my own experience about when it comes to convincing patients, quote unquote, but also trying to influence it for the better, right? I think there's multiple games happening at one time. There's the hospital game with the metrics. There's the patient interaction game. There's a game with yourself and your own mentality.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I think in the Northeast, and I recently had a family member in the hospital. Very much so. You're not cleared to walk. You're not cleared to get up without assistance or nursing and stuff. And it's like almost no discussion of, yep, you can do that if you do that. There's no opportunity to sign anything, even if family's there, right? Even if me can assist somebody appropriately to do that. So that is interesting. You brought up earlier Peter Attia, right? So you said he left, got a ton of experience in a completely unrelated field, consulting, some deep analytics, it sounds like, comes back and can apply that knowledge base to the current problem solving, situations he deals with. My guess is, and from following this person for a long time, it seems like this made him a better clinician. Only he can speak to that. And, there's this talk about when people are applying to medicine, you want to see a variety of backgrounds. You want to see somebody who's got some finance background, so they can go through this problem solving process and look at it from a different lens. Not everybody's doing chemistry and biology. And so that begs the question is are you doing yourself and your patients a disservice if you are not diversifying experiences, building range, in your words, right? Like, so, are you if you're just going a mile deep and, not at all wide, are you the best version of delivering patient care, not just, a special skill, but patient care, because that's ultimately what it is, human care. And, I'd argue you're not. So it's almost necessary to do that. I think we could probably give a ton of examples of how just spending the last 5 years behind the mic and meeting a bunch of people and interviewing tons of people, spending thousands of hours has made us better at our current jobs. And, I'm curious to see if you have any thoughts on that, and I can certainly share some experiences, but what are your thoughts about that?
I 100% agree. I think this touches on Haritha's second question about how can you be a physician and XYZ and do other things. Yeah, I was forced to take a 2-year gap year, right? I didn't get into medical school for 2 years, but that was the best thing that has happened to me. Oftentimes we're applying to medical school at the age of 21, 22. The frontal lobe doesn't develop till 25. I was making dumb decisions even at 24, like first year of medical school. I look back and I just think about my thought process and how I was thinking about the world. There's not enough time when you're that young coming out of college. Again, dictate is the word I'll use because that's our education system. Out of high school, out of college, we're type A, and you're taught to get in, get it done, and go on to the next and be the best you can be. I don't think, like you said, I don't think you're going to be the best you can be by just having that single experience of going down one railroad track, but rather going off the beaten path, learning some new things, getting some job experience, learning how the real world works. Because I think what happens is when we get to our patient interaction, it's not only the patient that we're interacting with. So often we think that when we're going through medical school and residency, but then you have a whole administration, you have nurses, you have other patient, you have patient family, like you have a whole world that you're interacting with, and everyone comes in with their own experiences. And if you only have your experience to share and only your perspective, well, it's not going to be a great dialogue. It's not going to be a great back and forth. It's difficult to understand different perspectives when all you have is your own. And so that kind of leads to one of the thoughts I had about is that I just don't think people read enough, right? Especially medical students. I mean, I'll change that. They read a lot, but they're just reading medicine. They're not reading other op-eds. They're not reading opinions. They're not reading about the world. They're not reading about what else could be going on. And so when I look at read this question about how can you be a physician, and I mean, I look at both of us, we're pretty worldly. I mean, we're looking at different things. We're looking at different perspectives. We listen to different podcasts that are not just medical related, but you start to form these links and you start to understand how it all works together. And so that's why I think having a gap year is crucial. Yes, is it 2 years delayed maybe, or 3 years delayed in terms of making money, and maybe it might delay starting a family. I mean, I don't know. It's a difficult conversation, a difficult topic, because everyone has their own timeline, because you finish around 30, 35, depending on what residency you choose. And there's a lot of big decisions you make at that time that can be life altering. So that's just my opinion. I don't think it's the right one, but I'm a big fan of diversifying experiences so that it makes you a better clinician.
Yeah. Diversity of thought creates excellence in practice, I think. And professional diversification isn't betrayal. I think it's evolution. I would say to that physician that I was commenting on social media, the EM doc, is what if that consultant redesigned systems that save thousands of physician jobs, hundreds and thousands of dollars, right? The best doctors, like you're highlighting, they bring outside perspective. So I reject this martyrdom approach that we've had because that's what makes us a sustainable physician, right? So I just don't think that sacrifice is the answer. I think a lot of people with us, certainly our generation, even the generation before us, and anybody who is coming into practice, Gen Z in particular, they're asking a lot of questions. Millennials do that too, but you know we've been through some stuff over the last couple of years. But Gen Z in particular are asking a lot of questions, and I think they're challenging the status quo. So this idea that you have to be a martyr, well, it's just not sustainable. It's not good for longevity in practice. And if you can't sustain in practice for 10, 15, 20 years, or maybe hopefully longer than that, then what good are you doing? At the end of the day, wouldn't it be better to have professional diversification so you become a marathoner and can actually last 30 years? An extra 10 years times how many patients, how much? So I think that that's another way to think about it as well. You can't just be sitting in one silo, but like you talk about, you know, the diversity of thought is critical because it gives you ways to relate with people from different backgrounds. Not everybody is coming and looking at the world with the lens that you're looking at. And the reality is so many of these discussions that we have with patients are back and forth. We do shared decision making. To your point about a patient says, I very much understand what getting up out of this bed could mean for me. I could fall, I could break a hip. I get it. I'm going to make that decision. You balance autonomy with, I think it's beneficence is the principle, like that this is the best thing for you. So. I don't forget. Somebody can look me up on that. The last thing I'll say about that is this thing I'm thinking about in terms of challenging that culture is, you know, people think that excellence requires you to self-destruct and you have to dive deep and you have to work really hard. And that's not the case, right? You can be dedicated to something and not be depleted, which used to be the old thought model. And establishing those types of boundaries and being very clear with them, that's not selfish, that's strategic.
Love that.
So that's kind of what I say.
What would you say if an undergrad comes up to you and says, Dr. Raja, well, I'm trying to go into neurosurgery. And I'm in, or an undergrad, let's say a pre-med, or a medical student, sorry. I'm trying to get into neurosurgery. They're an M1. How do I diversify my experiences? How do I do that?
I think it all starts with like what their experiences have been thus far. I'm always interested in like, what are you interested in? I think if you're just diversifying your experience and you're going and learning about things that you have zero interest in, it's not going to last long. You know, most people, they are attracted to something. And I think that's what makes it interesting, right? Like what is it that we talk about? When you try to pick up a book because somebody says it's good and you start reading it and halfway, you're like, man, I don't know. I know you and I have talked about this. You argued that you have to finish it.
Right.
But I think that if you make that a habit of just, I'm only going to do the things that I'm interested in, and I'm only going to diversify my mind with things I'm interested in, that's not diversity. That's just filling in your biases and those. So I think the first discussion would be, well, where are you coming from? Like, I want to understand a little bit more about that. What experiences have they had, and what experiences are they attracted to? And then understanding that most medical schools are going to walk you down a certain path. And we all know the boxes you have to check to get to neurosurgery residency. Actually, we think we do. I don't know. I didn't match neurosurgery. But we have a general idea. Like, you have to have a certain score. You have to have this. You have to have this type of letters or recommendation. It's pretty much the same template. But once you become the neurosurgeon, how are you going to be different than the other neurosurgeon? Is it just going to be your outcomes, your complications, or is there going to be something special more so than that? I'll give you a personal anecdote that's completely unrelated to medicine, right? This is interesting. So I've got this HVAC situation I'm dealing with. It's a freaking nightmare. And like, this one person came, installed it, has not gone according to plan. And it's been horrible. Kid you not, I'm in 90 degrees. And so since then, I've called a couple other people afterwards and I said, hey, listen, I just had the system installed 3 months ago. It has not been the best experience with the person I worked with. Will you help me? Nobody wants to touch it. For liability reasons, nobody wants to touch it. Imagine that you're a physician, somebody else did a surgery or did a procedure, and this poor patient just going from surgeon to surgeon, doctor to doctor, and no doctor wants to touch this patient. Like, what business are we in? We're in the business of helping people, or are we in the business of just securing the best outcomes so our resume looks good? So I think if you look at it from the latter point of view, then that neurosurgeon should do only the training required to make them an exceptional neurosurgeon, minimize adverse outcomes. But if you're looking to be an exceptional clinician and somebody who's going to make an impact in lives and change lives, then you need to think outside the box.
I totally agree with that. I always talk about how the goal, I think a lot of medical students, they think that they have to be the best orthopedic surgeon, the best, fill in the blank. It's not about that, right? It's about being the best Dr. Darsh. It's about being what makes you the best. And what makes me the best is doing research 24/7, putting out papers, being in the hospital all day. It's working out, reading books, living my best life, going to travel, having fun while I'm at work. And that's how I show up the best, right? I think patients want a doctor who shows up well, shows up for them. And so it comes down to that energy, right? I mean, if you're draining your energy and trying to be the best of something that you don't truly care about, but you think that's what you have to do, it's not going to work out. And that's where that moral injury, I think, comes from. That's where that burnout comes from. And I think it's just a myth that we've been told throughout medical school. And, it's funny, I think about these in framework. I'll let you go ahead. And then I have some frameworks that I think of, at least in terms of how medical students can diversify and kind of think about being entrepreneurial, XYZ, rather than just being.
I want to finish it by making it tactical for sure, people. I think that what I'm hearing from you, and I know what we're echoing here, is like, it all starts with a mindset shift, right? So reframing of that question is very important. It's not binary. Is it worth it? Is it not worth it? You can answer that question if you just put it to the numbers, which I highlighted for you that probably isn't, if that's the case, unless you got a lot of money in the bank. But the question is, how do we make it worth it? And the path forward, like for me, if people were to ask in terms of students, residents, I would say start building your platform now, not after training, early on. Luckily, a lot of people have done that. Spend extra time outside of your requirements to be a good medical student resident on professional development. Diversity of thought, if we can say it another way. Document your journey. This is something you said to me back in 2019, 2020, when I reached out, just because everybody's journey is unique and it becomes your differentiator, your unique experiences, right? It's also going to help you become more comfortable, quote unquote, marketing yourself, selling yourself, which is going to pay dividends down the road when it is something that you can monetize, when it is something that you can actually make a business out of. So that would be for early career physicians. I can probably give something for mid-career physicians, but I'm not really sure I'm qualified to, because I'm probably still considered an early career physician. But I think that's probably the core principle that I want people to keep in mind as they're thinking about.
Love that. So yeah, frameworks, at least. The way I kind of think about this, one of the most common questions I get is, how do you have a life in medical school? And so the way I think about this, you've heard of minimal viable product. I mean, it's like a startup business term about, so, basically, what is the minimum that you need to create for a product in order to sell it? Because so often when you work in a startup or business, you're thinking grandiose. You're thinking, oh, let's keep going. And this is all the features I'm thinking of. But it's okay. Let's break it down. What are the first principles? How do we get down to just what we need? Instead of minimal viable product, I think of it as minimal viable productivity. The thing is, to get the difference between a 90 and 100% on exam is probably 10, 12, 30. It's 4 more days of studying. It's a lot more. The problem is you're trained again as a type A to go into medical school to try to compete and be the best. But the thing is, what are you trying to achieve for? If you're a neurosurgeon, again, it comes down to boards. I still don't think grades matter that much. But what is the minimal viable energy, productivity that you need to put in to become a doctor? The difference between the lowest ranked medical student and the first ranked medical student is not much in the real world. And I would even argue the last ranked will now have more time because if they spent less time studying, more time diversifying their thought, more time doing the things that they want to do. And you actually have time to think about the things that you want to do. And that, as we talked about, can lead to better outcomes. It'll lead to a better life. It'll just lead to a better reframe of thinking.
How do you gauge productivity?
So it's interesting. I think it comes down to, well, there's many metrics, I think, right? One is energy. Do you feel exhausted after the day or studying or whatever, right? We talked about putting like a calendar and seeing if it's green, if it gives you energy, red, if it drains it, yellow, if it's neutral. I think concept for Sahil Bloom. Time is another one. If you use Parkinson's law, I remember in med school, I only gave myself 4 hours or 5 hours to study slides. And after that, I was done. And if that got me a passing grade, great. That was the minimal viable productivity. I knew that I could measure the time. The outcome for it was just to pass classes. I didn't care about getting A's or B's. C's got degrees is my mantra because it allowed me to put more thought into other things. I think another metric that you can use are iterations. How many iterations does it take for you to then get the outcome that you want? So I think those are the ways that I think about it. I think in medical school, those 3 kind of make the most sense because every class is going to be different. Every day is going to be different. But when you can look at either energy, time, or iterations, you have something to actually measure over and over again.
Yeah, I think to your point about being very clear with the outcomes that you are looking for, and then you can know which game you're playing. Yeah, if you're going for neurosurgery, then C's get degrees is not going to work, right? You're going to have to figure something else out or something really, really competitive, but you just have to be really honest with that. And you might have limited time, but just understand that that's the trade-off that you're willing to do. And that's okay too, if that's what you decide. I think some of the parting words I'll leave people for this because I think the reframe is really, really important. It's all about perspective in life. Another thing that I think about is at this point, you and I both have this venture that we've been on together for a long time. You've got your own consulting practice. I have one of that. I'm an employee as well. I guess breaking news that people should know that in the very near future, I'm going to also be starting my own direct pay practice in the tri-state area in New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania, seeing patients in both telemedicine as well as in person. But I think stop calling it a side hustle is really important. Rather, I would call it career insurance. Professional diversification equals risk management. That's what we're talking about, right? When we're talking about every single year over the last 20, 30 years, the reimbursements have been cut. We have spent so much time talking about how these corporations and, the administrators are making more money and the physicians, that money is not coming into our pockets. We've highlighted that these graphs of the healthcare burden is not because of physician pay, but you still have to be compensated for your time. Something I actually want to get your thoughts on, because this is something that I struggle with. I recently had an incident. I had a patient come to me, just very classic plantar fasciopathy, talked about how another clinician was taking care of it, a couple of injections, had now recommended shockwave treatment. I don't want to get too much into the weeds here, but shockwave treatment actually a very reasonable option to enhance healing. A lot of positives on that. The cost, though, that was quoted to this patient was for somewhere around, $1,500 for 4 treatments. I am very familiar with what the market value is for that, and that was very, very high. This person worked at the hospital that I did, and I was like, look, I'm going to give you professional courtesy, and I'm going to tell you that is a very high value, and that is not the market rate for that. I felt bad. I felt bad because I'm pointing out that this person is being given a bad deal financially speaking. This was my first meeting with this person, right? And I also think about like, okay, as I'm thinking about setting my own prices and that kind of stuff, I talked to Vince about this, his costs. We talked to Sassy about this. Like, how do you set that? And you talk to a lot of people who do the direct pay practice, and there's a huge variability. It's anywhere from like $150 an hour or for a consultation all the way up to $2,000 a consultation. Something that sounds ridiculous. But like, how does one, because I feel like you and I have had some conversations, how does one get comfortable with being a business person, charging somebody for healthcare, and especially if they're doing the direct pay model or concierge model, and not feel grimy almost?
I think it's difficult, but I think it comes down to a reframe of mindset. I don't think I'm the best person to ask for this, but the way I think about this actually comes back to the big beautiful bill in a way. I don't think it's worth taxing people who make high income earners for the making it more tax heavy. So I think tax cuts can be good, and this is part of the bill, right? One of the trade-offs that they're thinking is these high income earners can actually now put back money into the economy. They can build more things, right? So when you look at Elon, when you look at the podcasters of All In podcast, all these people have come up to make it. And so they feel like they're penalized for something that they now will be able to add more value to the country or to the world. So if you break that down to like our version, it's if I can make more by selling, I now can open up maybe a different clinic, and I now can have more access. I think having that more income come in will allow anyone in our field to start building it out a little bit more and getting more access and providing more value to other people. And I think it's tough, right? It's like also like a guilty conscience thing. It's then, do you pick a niche? Do you only do people who can afford certain treatments? Do you do a subscription model where you have different things? I mean, in the end, I think it comes down to the game that you're playing. Do you want to affect as many people as you can? Are you looking to change the way the field works? Are you looking to just give access to people who just need it? I think it's a tricky question, but I think it really comes down to the game that you want to play. In the end, I think it's a little tough.
And it's interesting. I hope people can understand, like, even me, who's been thinking about this for 5 years, is when it's actually kind of become clear since we've been doing this, but much longer than that. This has been a dream of mine for a long time, but I still go back and forth. That question that I asked was a very genuine one because I was feeling this way 2 days ago. But I'll share another anecdote that also makes you feel less than good, right? I've often talked about how the business of medicine drives the practice of medicine. Not long ago, I was at just a training conference where we were talking about certain procedures and how they get and what we were talking about amongst clinicians and the providers who do that procedure was, okay, well, this is how the procedure gets paid for. This is how many targets you would do, and each target would pay you X amount of money. At some point, somebody had mentioned, in order for you to break even your cost of goods, you have to do 3 separate targets, right, for the injection. But that feels so wrong to me because now you're letting recouping of funds make the decision of what it is. It's probably still appropriate. Nobody's talking about doing fraud. Nobody's talking about inappropriate procedures and unnecessary procedures to people. I know somebody's going to clip that up and talk about how, oh, look, this is what doctors do. They do unnecessary surgeries. No, that doesn't happen. But even having that decision-making process in the back of your mind is something that is not we sign up for. At least I didn't, right? Maybe I was naive when I did that. So I think that either way that you look at it, I go back and forth, and it's just so frustrating. Like, I don't want to do this anymore. And so then you're like, okay, well, I'm going to do it the other way where I should be compensated for my time and we're not paying for anything else, and it's just, I think this is something that you're going to have to get used to over time. I'm sure Vince has, I'm sure Sassy did. I'm sure other people that I've talked to did. I'm excited to share how that happened. So hopefully I'll get acclimated faster than.
I also want to say, I think the game that you're in requires you to put a higher price on things, right? Because in the end, you're also going to be competing with other providers who are essentially kind of doing the same thing you are maybe. But if I were a patient and I see a $5 treatment versus a $100 treatment, and typically, let's say it's around $70, you're going to question the person who's charging less sometimes. And then I think that question is, do they feel adequate? Are they actually a good provider, et cetera? Whereas, and again, all this comes down to influence and marketing and behavior and stuff too. But it comes down to what your goal is, right? Because I also think there's this effect where if you charge more, you're going to start living up to that as a provider. And you're actually going to fulfill that gap that you may feel like imposter versus actually giving that priced level of care.
$1,000
There you go.
Putting it right there.
There you go.
It's interesting. You know, the example, I'd push back a little bit because the example you get at 5 and 100, yes, there's a big gap, right? But what if it's somewhere in the 70s market value, somebody's charging 65 and somebody's charging 85? That's where it gets challenged because everybody wants value. Everybody wants the deal. I don't know anybody who wants to pay 85 when they think it costs 70. Even if you promise them this is going to be worth it, I promise you, you're going to get better quality service. I'm doing this all the time with certain clinicians I'm sending to. Hey, heck, Trifecta, right? I'll give a shout out to Jeremy, and they are typically, they're direct pay. They're out of network. And I'll tell, when I say, hey, listen, you need to go see these guys, it's very clear that this is investment. They're not the only ones, right? There's a couple of really great folks down in here in the South Jersey area where I say the same thing, but not everybody does take insurance. And so I think that that's where it gets a little bit, but I think your point still remains.
Yeah, it's a tough, it depends on the game you're playing. Does those $10 extra allow you to build out another service if it's aesthetics or, you know, different equipment that nobody else is using? I think it just depends on kind of what the scope is.
Right on. All right, man. I know we're coming up on time, and but so what are some parting words of wisdom for the folks here? Maybe I think we've answered the question. I'm sure they can reach out to us if there's more coming up. But anything else that you think that we should leave them with?
I mean, I could talk about this for an hour or two, different frameworks that medical students can use. But I think the one about the minimal value productivity is probably the main one that I like to use. And I think that hits home for a lot of people. I mean, there's other things that we can do, reverse engineering, think about present moment in the future versus now, and reverse engineering it. But we'll save that for another time.
Yeah, I think the couple things that I just want people to remember is the whole concept of professional diversification. I think that's really important. We want to be able to build something that somebody can't take away from you with all these legislations and that kind of stuff, and minimal regulation over you. If you are your own business and you want to run it like one, that's going to end up working in your favor down the road. Name of the game is longevity, and it has multiple meanings as we talked about on here. And longevity in your career is going to be really important. So it's all about reframing and how do you do that. And so if you are a young physician who is going into it, or if you're an early career physician, if, again, it feels awkward trying to give advice to somebody who's further ahead of us, but I know we have some late career physicians who will listen to this. I know this for a fact. So if you're waiting for permission to build beyond medicine, you got it. This is your permission. I give you permission to do that. And if you're early on in your career, just remember the medical degree is a platform. It's not a prison. And yeah, the best revenge is against a broken system is a life well lived, man.
Love that. Like it.
All right.
Sounds good.
Until next time, buddy.
See you.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Medicine Redefined. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to check out some of the additional resources in the show notes. Please also check out our social media platforms where you can find more content like this. You can follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at MedRedefined. We also want to thank our team for the production of this podcast, Arita Yepori on social media, Zanab Lugmani on research, and Sarah Khan for newsletter. Oh, and if you want to get similar bite-sized information delivered to your inbox every Sunday, please be sure to sign up for our newsletter. Also, if you enjoyed the show, please be sure to subscribe, review, and share with anyone who you think will gain value from this as well. Now, time for the ever so important disclaimers. This podcast is intended for general public use and is for educational purposes only. It does not constitute the practice of medicine, nor should be construed as medical advice. No physician-patient relationship is formed, and anything discussed in this podcast does not represent the views of our employers. We recommend that you seek the guidance of your personal physician regarding any specific health-related issues.